Good morning. It's wonderful to see everybody out at pretty early in the morning to hear two rather distinguished gentlemen talking about their lives. I don't think you get very much of that. So eat your heart out television channels. Here we are to have a longer conversation. So I wanted to start out with saying that I think, both of these books and both of you have lived almost, you're almost the same age, you've lived lives in India, you have almost the same experiences, yet, so I think what is really exciting about putting you together is that in some ways, these memoirs show you a different side of India, in the sense that I think when you're looking back at the country, you always want different voices, and I think it's interesting that both of you have chosen to write. I know this is only your second volume, and there is a third volume to come. And of course, Gurucharan ji has done this incredible memoir. And I wanted to start out with asking you, both of you had different names when you were born. Both of you, can you hear me?
Yes, I was unfortunately given the name of Venkata Subramanian.
Yeah.
And my aunt objected very strongly and suggested to my mother that I should either be called Ajit or Ravi.
Yeah.
And she chose Ajit. So I can always tell who is an intimate family friend by their calling me Ajit rather than Mani.
Yeah.
Then when I went to school, that is boarding school at the age of 7 or so, like Napoleon, I crowned myself because the diminutive of Subramanian in Tamil is Mani.
Yeah.
So I gave myself my name.
So, you have an interesting story about your name too.
Right. And, the reason I was able to write so clearly about my childhood is because of my mother's diary. She kept a diary. And I appear for the first time on page 17 of her diary when she's calling me at age 3 months a restless baby. Then a year later, she's calling me a difficult child. Another year later, she's calling me a troublemaker. And then they give me the name Ashok Kumar. And I go to school, and my teacher changes my name from Ashok Kumar to Nahi Kumar, because she says I'm always raising my hand wanting to do something that I'm not allowed to do. So it's always Nahi, Nahi. So it's easier to just call you Nahi Kumar. But when my grandmother suspected that my mother, her daughter-in-law, had given me that name, Ashok Kumar, she suspected that my mother was secretly in love with a Bollywood actor named Ashok Kumar. And so she took me to her guru, and she placed me at his feet, and she says, Guruji enu na deo. And the Guru sees me at his feet, so the simplest thing that comes to his mind is Gurucharan Das. So overnight, I am transformed at the age of 3.5 from the Prince of Happiness, Ashok Kumar, perfectly nice thing, to the humble servant of the feet of the Guru. And so some years later, I asked the Guru, why did you give me that name? And he says, well, it's good to be reminded about humility once in a while. Yeah. And he gave me the very best definition of humility that I've ever heard, which is to take your work seriously, but not yourself seriously.
Yes. That's very good advice. If you think of how, if you look at Jhumpa Lahiri's namesake, and if you think of how names define people, it would be interesting to think if you had kept Ajit, and if everybody called you Ajit, and everybody called you Ashok Kumar, how that might have, whether you would have lived different lives. But I wanted to ask you, both of you also have another commonality. You were both born in Pakistan. You were born in Lahore, and you write really beautifully about Lalpur, which of course is now changed, and it's Faisalabad. And I wanted to, I think, could we really talk about your experiences in Pakistan? Because you open the first consulate in Karachi, and you write extensively of that period and how that influences you much later too. But can you talk about getting your birth certificate from Lahore when Pervez Musharraf digitized all the records and you found out you were born on a different day? The birth certificate, you were born on a different day, the 9th and
All
the
right,
10th.
yes.
Pakistan.
Okay, yes,
Birth
yes.
certificate.
Yeah, sure. My book begins by referring to President Pervez Musharraf, who was born in India, coming to India as the president of Pakistan and asking whether he could have a copy of his birth certificate. And although the publisher cut out that line, the Delhi municipal authorities produced a birth certificate for him about 4 or 5 months later, and I'm not absolutely sure that it was genuine. So when I went to Lahore as a minister at the head of a ministerial delegation dealing with local government, and the mayor of Lahore started boasting about how they had digitalized all their records, I asked whether they had digitalized their records for 1941. He said, yes. I said, have you digitalized it for April 1941? He looked a little puzzled, but said, I'm sure we have. So I said, what about the 10th of April 1941?
Yeah.
And he said, I have to look. So I said, well, I'm asked, why are you interested? So I said, because that's my date of birth and I was born in the city. And next morning, this was at 6:30 in the evening. And next morning, when I came down to the meeting at about 9 in the morning, there was an envelope which contained my birth certificate. They'd produced it overnight compared to Delhi taking months to give the birth certificate to Pervez Musharraf. So then I looked at it and I found that it said I was born on the 9th of April. And my mother had been very particular, and I couldn't see why, to repeatedly tell me, that I was born at 24 minutes past 12. So that made me not the 9th of April, but the 10th of April. But because she'd been admitted into the hospital on the 9th, the date remained the 9th on the birth certificate, but my real date of birth is the 10th. But I think that's confused not only my astrologers, but also those who guide my destiny. It probably accounts for the numerous ups and downs in my life, while they can't make up their minds whether I was born on the 9th or the 10th.
But while we're at it, I want you to narrate the story, which I thought was very interesting, about a gentleman called Mr. Tulli, when you're in the car, when you're getting back from this thing, and he told you he was...
It was an extraordinary tale. My first posting was in Brussels. And I was there from 1964 onwards. So in 1968, we were to celebrate the beginning of the birth centenary of Mahatma Gandhi. So my ambassador, I'd finished 3 years in 67, so my ambassador wrote to the foreign secretary asking whether I could stay on for another year. I had, in connection with these celebrations, I had booked the staff car. I got into it and somebody rushed up to me and said I should go up to see the ambassador. And the ambassador waved before me a letter from the foreign secretary saying they had considered his request and decided to turn it down, and I had to return to Delhi immediately. So as the car was about to leave, one of my assistants, M.B. Tulli, jumped into the car and asked, and I said to him, I've just been transferred. So he checked the mileage. He then checked the number of the car. He then checked the time. And then he made a magisterial pronouncement that I would not be leaving Brussels till the 16th of October the following year. And I said, this is ridiculous. The foreign secretary has just written that I have to go back immediately. But by the time we came back, there was another message from the foreign secretary saying that they had agreed to the ambassador's suggestion that I should wait till Wednesday, the 2nd of October, 1968, to kick off the Mahatma Gandhi birth centenary celebration. So I couldn't, of course, the Air India flight, which we had to take, came to Brussels once a week on Wednesdays, which is why that Wednesday of 2nd October was important. Obviously, I could not leave on that same day, so I planned to leave on Wednesday the 9th. But the flight on Wednesday the night got cancelled, and I ended up actually leaving Brussels on Wednesday the 16th of October, exactly as predicted by this numerologist, who was an assistant in the Foreign Service. Later, when Indira Gandhi was assassinated, a number of astrologers and so forth were asked whether they had predicted her death. And M.B. Tully, who by then had retired and set himself up as a professional numerologist, turned out to be the one who had predicted it most accurately. So that has shaken my firm belief in atheism and my firm opposition to astrology. Maybe there's something in it.
Yeah. So I wanted to ask Gurucharan, you both, of course, part of your experience and, how you discover yourself in some ways. You discovered how discovered your ability to win elections and talk this thing while you were in Cambridge. And Gurucharan, you went to Harvard. You got into Harvard, Yale, and Princeton. Am I wrong? Am I right?
Harvard, Yale, and Princeton.
Harvard, Yale, and Princeton. So, you guys were Indians. You were abroad at a point of time when very few Indians really went across to study. I mean, they did, but not as many. And I wanted to talk about your experiences there. Could you start?
Yeah. Well, you were unfair. You asked him about Pakistan.
But I will, because he's given two stories. He's given two stories. I'm going to bring you back to Pakistan, don't worry.
Yeah, okay.
I just thought that we've done the Pakistan thing, and I'm going to talk to you about Lialpur at the end.
Well...
You want to go right now?
Yeah,
we can go.
Because, Pakistan's on my mind now.
Pakistan is on your mind, so we'll keep America at bay.
So, now I am 5 years old. I'm in kindergarten in Lahore. And that same teacher who calls me Nahi Kumar, we all have a pencil box, all the children, it's 2 Anna pencil boxes with 2 pencils and 1 eraser in it. And the kid next to me is poor. He has no pencil box. But the kid in front of me is rich. And he has 2 pencil boxes, and one of them is made in England. And he's the only one in class who comes in a car while we all walk to school. So one day at recess, I go and take the pencil box on the table of the rich kid and put it on the table of the poor kid as a kind of symmetry.
Yeah,
that
kind of
I'm
justice.
Creating. Plus, this kid irritates me. He's borrowing my pencils all the time. And so, after recess, we come together, and everybody arrives, and the rich kid screams, "Who stole my pencil box?" And the teacher gets worried because he's the richest kid in class. And so, we all have to stand up. And everybody goes around saying, "No, I didn't do it," etc. And when it comes to Ayan, by the way, this boy is a Muslim boy. His name is Ayan. And he says, "Yes, there's a pencil box on my table, but I didn't steal it. I didn't take it. I don't know who did." Nobody believes him. My turn. And this is when I should have said what I had done, but I'm frozen in fear. temporary insanity has overtaken me, and this incident is a nightmare for a long time. But 5 months later, it's 1947, August, Partition. Lahore has gone to Pakistan, and we are Hindus, we have to flee for our lives. Luckily, we crossed the border, and we are waiting at Jalandhar platform, in the train, waiting for the train to move. And at those days, trains took their time. And through the window, I see a handsome, tall policeman, Muslim policeman, guarding the peace on the platform. And 2 Sikh boys come from the back, out of nowhere, and they stab this man with their kirpan, and the rest next is all red. Blood is flowing. He's fallen down on the ground and he's died. My mother shuts the window. And for me, this incident, Mandira, is also temporary insanity. Except in first case, it was a personal temporary insanity. In the second case, it's a whole nation, or at least Punjab, going insane. When people are cheerfully killing their neighbors in the name of religion. And from that day, I have always had a suspicion of religion, or certainly religion when it enters into the public space or in politics.
I think that's a very important point. And would you like to comment on that before we start talking about?
What would you like me to do?
I thought you wanted to comment on the religion entering political spaces.
Well, I wanted to go to Pakistan because I had been appointed as the secretary of the committee that had been set up by Indira Gandhi to provide relief supplies to Bangladesh to enable them to take back their refugees. So I was appointed at exactly the same time as the surrender documents were being signed in Dhaka. And during the course of the first 6 or 7 months of 1972, when memories of 1971 were very fresh, I heard the most atrocious stories of discrimination and physical abuse, murder, rape by Pakistani soldiers in East Pakistan. And it made me wonder whether the Pakistanis were brutes or civilized people. So when the opportunity came for me to be able to go to Pakistan, that happened in December 1978, I went expecting a very challenging assignment. But instead of a challenging assignment, I found myself being welcomed like a long-lost hero. And there was tremendous affection, tremendous, I would say, love, tremendous respect, and a complete openness, despite the fact that I was the only diplomatic representative who was Indian. Every single political leader at the height of Ziaul Haq's regime, in the same year that Bhutto had been hanged, would welcome me with open arms and be completely open and frank about what they wanted, especially from us. And when Hafiz Pirzada of the PPP, who was one of Bhutto's closest aides, asked me whether we would offer them sanctuaries to conduct a revolution in Sindh, sanctuaries in our desert, the Thar desert, I said to him, Hafiz, the only revolution you'll ever make is when you stir the sugar in your coffee. So you start a revolution, we'll talk about sanctuaries. So to this extent, it was frank and free. And my illustration of what it meant to be there, I'm going to be reading out a passage that will show it to you.
Could you do
so
this?
we'll come to that later. So I came back completely convinced that our Foreign Office had got it totally wrong. That our biggest asset in Pakistan is the people of Pakistan.
Yeah.
And in the last 40 years that I have been back from Pakistan, 42 years, I have been back to Pakistan more than 40 times. And this has given me the opportunity to travel to other provinces of Pakistan. I've been to all of them. I've met with people there. As soon as they see an Indian, the first thing they want to know is India-Pakistan relations. And studying the history of India-Pakistan relations, I find that progress is only made when there is a military dictator in office.
Yeah.
Because he provides a stable government and can make concessions. Whereas when civilian governments are there, they tend to be completely unstable. So although dictatorship in Pakistan is terrible for the Pakistani people, it's very good for us. And therefore, I would earnestly recommend, as I do in my book, that we should be in continuous dialogue with the Pakistanis, because actually, since they were one of us, even if they are not one of us today, if we talk to them, solutions come very easily. And the best proof of that is that when Manmohan Singh was the Prime Minister, there was a back-channel discussion between Sati Lamba on our side and Tariq Aziz on their side. And they only talked about Kashmir.
Yeah.
And they arrived at a formula of various, about 16 points, of which Musharraf took out the key 4 ones and called it the 4-point formula. So if we talk to the Pakistanis, we can find solutions. If we don't talk to them, how are we going to find solutions? And I don't understand a government that has the courage to conduct surgical strikes against the Pakistanis, but doesn't have the guts to sit across a table and talk to them.
Yeah.
I don't understand our Pakistan policy at all.
Thank you. I think that's well received. So I wanted to ask you, Gurucharan ji, if you look at, I mean, we've talked about incidents, we've talked about your name change, we've talked about Pakistan, we've talked about things that we've talked about various incidents, we've talked about your lives, we've talked about things that influenced you. In a memoir, one of the central aspects of your memoir, and I wanted to look at it, the thing is that, you're looking for freedom. It's a certain kind of freedom. And from the time where you choose to dispense justice in your way and in your contemporary insanity, this idea of the difficulty of being good, this idea of finding freedom, this moksha that you talk about, how does that fit into your life? And how do you, in a memoir, put in, what do you put in and what do you take out?
When you write a memoir, you have to remember your life.
Yeah. I think you said it's much better to relive it.
And when you remember your life, let me into a secret. You relive your life. And I have discovered that reliving your life is actually better than living it. And why? Because you can play God. You decide which incident you put in and what you leave out. But the temptation in writing a memoir is to want to look good. All of us want to look good.
Yeah.
But if you end up looking good on every page, the reader says, he's a pompous ass. Why should I read about him? But if you make the opposite mistake and you try and look too bad, then he says he's a bloody loser. Why should I read him? So it's best to be yourself and to mix the two. And really, at the end of the day, that film Rashomon?
Yeah.
Where there's a murder in Kurosawa's film, and 5 witnesses come forth, and each of those tells a different story of the murder. to the point where the judge is totally confused as to who was the killer. Well, of course, I mean, one really never knows what happens. And that's why the memory of an event is actually better than the event itself. Because the memory, when you are doing something, so much is going on, you're sleepwalking through life. But when you remember it with 50 years of your own experience through which you look at it. And so you transform it. And so one never really knows. And anyway, I'm not answering your question fully. But as to another sort of freedom, it came about when I was remembering my life. And in the process, you start connecting the dots. You know, from the restless baby to the difficult child, to the troublemaker, to the person who did what he did to iron, and who never understood the partition. And even now, by the way, I don't think we have achieved closure with the partition. And I think we'll need a great writer like Tolstoy, who wrote War and Peace and brought closure for the Russians to the Napoleonic War. So similarly, I mean, I hope such a writer will come. But coming back, the business of not only from childhood, but later on, I somehow ended up taking a different course. When you had asked me at Harvard, and at Harvard, my mother, I remember at Palam Airport, I'm getting into an Air India flight, and she's got tears in her eyes and saying, "You better study something useful. You got to come back and get a job."
And you study Sanskrit.
And what do I do at Harvard? I study Greek tragedy, Russian novel, Chinese ceramics, Renaissance painting, Beethoven's music, and even
all the important stuff.
And even Sanskrit love poetry. And when my mother hears that I'm studying Sanskrit at Harvard, she says, "Hi, e munda. A dead language, now only the dead will give him a job." And then I finish at Harvard with a degree in philosophy. I'm going off to do a PhD at Oxford in philosophy. And I tell myself, do I really want to spend the rest of my life at that stratosphere of abstract thought? No. I want a life of action. And so I don't go to Oxford. And my mother's worst nightmare is true. She has a grown-up, unemployed son at home, Vela. Vela is the word.
Yes.
And we have this...
Yes, we know. Vela is not a good word to be.
And this nosy neighbor comes to my mother every other day. And she asks her, "Thoda munda ki kar raha hai?" And my mother... she's so, I mean, I can see her anxiety. And so I quickly answer the first advertisement I find in the newspaper. It's a company that makes Vicks Vapor Rub. And I don't know anything about business, but I apply and they take me on. So again, here I had a promising academic career, and I took another course. And then, of course, when I'm 50, I
leave it all,
the business life, and become a starving writer.
Yes.
And my wife, she's a good sport, and she says, "Acha, now there'll be no salary checks coming, but let's see how we do it." And she comes along with it. My point is that another sort of freedom is freedom from expectations, I have realized. Expectations of others, your parents, etc., but also of yourself.
Yeah.
Mostly of yourself, of wanting to be somebody and not a nobody.
Yeah.
You know, wanting, like even the other day I went to Bahari and Sons in Delhi in Khan Market and my book was not in the window. And I said, I go and protest. I said, what? I'm an important writer and you haven't put my new book in the window? And he sheepishly puts my book at the back. I said, no, in the front. Now, you see, that's the problem. And that is why another sort of freedom that I have discovered is really a freedom from one's own self and one's own expectations and one's own ego primarily.
Which is very difficult to do.
Yeah.
So I wanted to ask Maniji, you know, you in some ways, what was the impetus? I know you in your preface you write about the reason you wrote this is because because Chiki Sarkar pushed you, and she said that you needed to write this book. But in some ways, your second volume is really setting history correct. So the Rajiv I Knew is in a way a defense for a prime minister you feel should be appreciated more. You sort of see. But what was the reason for you to write your book?
Well, I wrote, unlike him who had some sort of help from his mother's diary, I didn't have that, but I do have a good memory.
Yeah.
And I didn't have to pick and choose. What I remembered was what I thought was worth recounting. But I did wonder why anybody would want to read my memoir when I failed in 83 years to do anything notable that will go down in history. So when this rather startling suggestion was made to me that I should write my memoirs, I started protesting ferociously that I had done nothing worthwhile and therefore no one would be interested in my life. But at that point, Sonia Gandhi, who was also at the same reception in my house, she said, I think you should write it. And at that point, I understood that she had no further plans for me in politics. So it's because I was going to be given triple talaq by the three Gandhis that I thought maybe as an alternative, I could put my memoirs down. So I did, but it took me about 5 years to start. And fortunately for me, the COVID lockdown took place.
Yeah.
And if it hadn't been for the COVID lockdown, you wouldn't have been stranded in the Darbar Hall this morning. So I sat and I started writing. And to my astonishment, the whole thing turned out to be 500,000 words long. So Chiki threw up her hands in despair and said, I asked for a memoir and you produced a War and Peace. So we had to negotiate over a period of a year, during which it was decided that the Rajiv Gandhi portion, which I thought is the only reason why anybody might want to look at my memoir, should be taken out of the memoir since it was political biography rather than personal memories. So she said, we'll publish your autobiography separately and this political biography separately. And I insisted that it should be published because without that, I don't think it's worth anyone's time trying to check on where I was born and why I was called Venkata. So all these were irrelevant little things. I enjoyed writing it. I've always enjoyed writing, but I've never known when to stop. And my PA is my archivist. He had saved all the papers relating to my official life from the time that I became an MP and he became my staff officer. Yeah. And he kept producing these documents and giving them to me. So the thing went on and on and on until Chiki threw up her hands. So that is how we have 3 volumes. And the volume, which is called The Rajiv I Knew, it also has a very important subtitle. not only the Rajiv I knew, and why he was the most misunderstood Prime Minister that India has had. And it seemed to me, on reading, not so much because I was politically associated with him, I wasn't as a civil servant, but it seemed to me that he had been extremely unfairly treated. And that the courts had vindicated him, both with regard to Shah Bano, as well as with regard to the Bofors. On Bofors, it was said by the court that after 16 years of investigation, the CBI have not produced, I quote, a scintilla of evidence that he had taken even a penny. And yet he was pilloried for that. Equally on the Shah Bano case, while even today I find most journalists say that he reversed the 1985 judgment, the Supreme Court said that the act he passed was actually the codification of that judgment. The main difference was that he incorporated these aspects of Muslim personal law into our civil law with one little change, which was actually the original intention of the Quran, which is that the compensation will be paid to the woman, not for the 3-month iddat period, but within the 3-month iddat period. So with that change made, and with the state Waqf board responsible to the magistrate, that has been the law for the last 25 years. And for 25 years, all Muslim women who are divorced are being divorced and protected under this act. And yet he is regarded as a communalist. I just don't understand that. Equally, he is accused of having opened the locks at the Babri Masjid. That was done by Arun Nehru. He did it on his own precisely because if he'd informed the Prime Minister would have given him a big no. But then he worked through the judiciary, and the judiciary pronounced that he could actually open the locks because the superintendent of police and the district magistrate both said there would be no law and order problem. And that is the beginnings of this saga that has brought us to our present state. So it's a vindication based not upon my findings, but the findings of the law with respect to Rajiv Gandhi. The third volume will be about my political life because by a strange coincidence, my 50th birthday coincided with my getting a ticket to fight an election, thereby changing my career. And I got elected, but in the meanwhile, I lost my patron, Rajiv Gandhi, who was assassinated. So that's where the book ends. And the next book, the final volume, which will be out sometime this year, deals with my political life for the last 33 years. Also, it's called A Half-Life in Politics, because that's taken from atomic theory, which says that radiation is measured in half-lives.
Yes.
It increases for a while, then glows, and after that it starts declining until it peters out completely. And that's an exact description of my years in politics. I'm an absolute nobody now, but there was a time when I thought I did count. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Now, before we end, and we're going to throw it open to the audience for 3 minutes. Would you like to talk about your career change?
Well, yeah, I just wanted, since he spoke about Indira Gandhi's period and the Bangladesh war, I'm reminded of another incident at the time, and this is, I'm working for Vicks at this moment. I have risen reasonably high up. I enjoy the rough and tumble of the business life. And one year, there's a flu in the country, and we sell a hell of a lot of Vicks during the flu. And in the eyes of our headquarters in America, we are heroes because of record profits. But the day we are celebrating, the company lawyer gives me a summons from Delhi, which says that we have broken the law. And it asks me to come to Delhi to explain why. So I arrive at the office of the Joint Secretary, and he keeps me waiting for 2 hours outside with 2 lawyers on each on my side. And then we are led into this office, and he's reading the newspaper. And while we sit down and we wait, he keeps reading the newspaper. And then after a little while, he puts the newspaper down. And he says, "Kya?" And I said, "Sir, aap bataiye kya? Aapne hame bulaya hai." So he says, "No, I have not read your file. What is it you want?" I said, "Look, here's the summons." And I show him the summons, and he says, "You've broken the law." And so explain. So I told him that there was a flu in the country, and we were doing our dharma. We are keeping the shelves stocked of the chemist shops and the pharmacies with Vicks. And we thought we were producing for the country. We helped millions of children, reduced the anxieties of their mothers, and we thought we had done good. And now you're telling us that we haven't done good. And by the way, there was a 3-year jail sentence associated with breaking the law of licensing, because there was a particular amount of tonnage of Vicks that we were allowed to produce, and we had overproduced that tonnage. So we had broken the law. Anyway, he says, "You guys in the private sector, you're all crooks, and especially you multinationals, and I want to make an example of you. And so the law will now take its course, now jao." So he sends us out, and at the door, I don't know what gets inside me. The lawyers are shivering, and I say, "Sir, it's not every day that an executive of a multinational company goes to jail anywhere in the world. So this will be news. It will be carried in the New York Times, Washington Post, in Indian papers, papers all over. And what do you think the world will think of us when they read that here was a company that was producing something, doing so much good? Talk about the difficulty of being good. It was doing so much good, and in return, the government decides to send to jail the executive of this company. And how will our Prime Minister, how will Indira Gandhi look to the eyes of the world? What will they think of such a law that we have? And what kind of people are we to have such insane laws? And he says, "Are you threatening me?" I said, "No." And then he says, "Jao." And of course, I had many sleepless nights, and ultimately the government dropped this inquiry. The reason why I feel strongly is that most of you did not, or many of you, certainly young people, have no idea what it was like to work under the license Raj. It was an insanity. You remember temporary insanity that lasted for 40 years. And we lost 2 generations of our country to opportunities at that time. And that's why 1991 was an azadi, a true azadi. 1947, we'd only got our political freedom.
And so
we lost it.
So on this note of azadi, I'm going to insist that you must buy the book. I'm sorry, there are going to be no questions. We're already over time. If you need to ask questions, I think you can ask them individually. They're both going to sign their books. You're going to sign your book, right?
There's no time, so I have one sentence to pronounce before we leave. I completely disagree with the last few remarks of Gurucharan Das. I think he has completely distorted everything that we stand for, and we've come to this present state because of that kind of thinking.
And it's always nice to end on a disagreement. Okay. So, there are books to be signed. You can see both sides here. Thank you so much.